Today is Wednesday, April 22nd, and this is VOA's International Edition. I'm Lori Lunden in Washington. Coming up, critics say it's political. President Trump says it's to protect American jobs.
In order to protect American workers, I will be issuing a temporary suspension of immigration into the United States.
Why is the coronavirus hitting one Native American tribe far worse than any other?
Wash your hands for 20 seconds. Well, if you don't have running water, and water is scarce and has to serve many functions throughout an extended family, that's just harder to comply with even if people are trying.
Also ahead, with African American lives being lost at disproportionate rates, American hip-hop artists are planning a fundraising concert this weekend. It's all on today's International Edition. Despite growing impatience over shutdowns, iconic events around the world like the U.S. National Spelling Bee in June, Spain's Running of the Bulls in July, and Germany's Oktoberfest, events are being canceled around the world because of the coronavirus pandemic. The push to reopen has set off warnings from health officials that by Tuesday, COVID-19 had killed well over 170,000 people worldwide. Experts say the crisis is far from over. In the U.S., there are now more than 824,000 cases of the coronavirus. In New York, the hardest-hit state in America, the number of coronavirus deaths is inching close to 15,000. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo met with President Trump at the White House Tuesday, where they agreed to split responsibilities for doubling coronavirus testing in the state.
The federal government will work on the supply of tests and reagents from the national manufacturers. They'll take that half of the equation. We will take the half of the equation that is working with the labs in the state and getting them to perform the tests.
Still, Governor Cuomo said it will not be a fast process.
It will take several weeks at best. This is an enormous undertaking to go from 20 to 40. Remember, has taken us over 1 month to get to where we are today.
Meanwhile, Congress and the Trump administration have reached an agreement on a new coronavirus economic relief bill. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
Congress and the Trump administration have reached a deal on a new coronavirus relief bill. The nearly $500 billion package will put a small business rescue program back in business after it ran out of money last week. That makes up the bulk of the package's spending, with another $75 billion going to hospitals and $25 billion for boosting virus testing.
This is a significant package.
Senate GOP Chief Mitch McConnell says Democrats held up the small business funding while pushing hospital and testing money. Minority Leader Chuck Schumer says they were right to do it.
We don't have enough tests.
The package is roughly double what Republicans originally designed as a stopgap measure. Schumer says the next bill will help cash-starved local and state governments, among others. Sagar Magani, Washington.
President Trump has announced that he will be placing a 60-day hold on immigration in an effort to limit competition for jobs in a U.S. economy wrecked by the virus.
By pausing immigration, we'll help put unemployed Americans first in line for jobs as America reopens. So important. It would be wrong and unjust for Americans laid off by the virus to be replaced with new immigrant labor flown in from abroad.
Immigration advocates like Robert McCaw with the Council on American Islamic Relations say the order ignores the fact that immigrants are working on the front lines helping the country get through the pandemic.
It's not going to solve the coronavirus pandemic. It's going to leave us with a shortage of healthcare providers, people that are involved in transportation, pharmacy, grocery. It puts us at a disadvantage. It's not going to help us out of the problem Trump's made in mismanaging this pandemic. It's a distraction.
Almost all visa processing by the State Department has already been suspended for weeks because of the coronavirus. Health officials in the state of Arizona Sunday said positive coronavirus tests reached nearly 5,000, with 184 known deaths in the state. And the Navajo Nation, which extends into parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, has been hit harder than any other Native American tribe. The Navajo Area Indian Health Service said the number of positive coronavirus tests had surpassed 1,100 as of Saturday, with 44 known deaths. Joining us to talk more about why this might be the case for this particular tribe is Sarah Krakoff, professor of natural resources and civil procedure Indian law at the University of Colorado. She's also the co-editor of Tribes, Land, and Environment. What do you make of these preliminary statistics?
There has been more widespread and aggressive testing across the Navajo Nation than in other places, whether it's Indian country or not. And, the Navajo Nation just has a big population relative to other tribes. If it's proportional, we could only speculate. So here's one possible theory, but it's speculation. One thing that's true about the Navajo Nation is that it's extremely rural. There's a lack of infrastructure, and the lack of infrastructure extends to not having sufficient water resources flowing to many homes still throughout the Navajo Nation, and insufficient stores and places to shop. And so there are two phenomena which are pretty common for Navajo families and households. One is leaving the reservation for wage work. A lot of Navajo tribal members will leave the Navajo Nation to work and then come back home because the extended family is still, a very important unit for Navajo people. And so even if they leave for work during the week or even for weeks at a time, come back home. Of course, that's a way to import diseases, including the coronavirus. And the small town called Chilchimbito, which was one of the first sites of the spread of the virus. It's a tiny, tiny community near Kayenta, Arizona. And apparently there was a church service and a lot of people got sick at the church service, and then it spread out from there. I don't know, but I could surmise that it must have been folks going away to work at jobs outside of the Navajo Nation and coming back home for ceremonies, services, gatherings with family, and therefore spreading the virus. So that's one theory about why it might have spread. And then secondly, because of the rural nature of the Navajo Nation and also the lack of infrastructure and services, it's more difficult to engage in all the best practices that we've known about for months now, like wash your hands for 20 seconds. Well, if you don't have running water, and water is scarce and has to serve many functions throughout an extended family homestead, that's just harder to comply with, even if people are trying. And then second, stay-at-home orders. The Navajo Nation has been, again, I think, very forward-looking. The President, Jonathan Nez, issued stay-at-home orders for the nation and a curfew because, he's trying to use the nation's sovereignty to protect his people. But when people are very used to having to go to town to shop on a regular basis, that probably persisted for longer than it should have while the virus was spreading.
Do you have any idea how they were able to get so much testing done?
It looks like the Navajo area hospitals, either Indian Health Service hospitals or the network of Indian Health Service facilities throughout the Navajo Nation, was activated pretty early to engage in more widespread testing than is typically provided in extremely rural areas. I think it's still not sufficient. I mean, IHS funding has been insufficient for a long, long time, but at least it's there. At least there are these resources for health services available to Native people because of the treaty rights that they have that provide for this provision of public health services. So it was those network of hospitals that wouldn't exist but for, the unique government-to-government relationship with the tribe.
And what about the actual hospital health services available to those people who are sick with the virus?
It sounds like the facilities are getting fairly quickly tapped out. Some of the clinics are really small clinics and don't have the full range of inpatient services that is necessary to treat COVID-19 patients who get quite sick and need respirators and so forth. There are some in the bigger regional hospitals, like the Tuba City Indian Medical Center is bigger and has more facilities and resources. But I think this is the worry, and this is why, again, the nation took such aggressive steps. It wouldn't take much to put their resources over the edge and have a scenario similar to what happened and is is happening in New York City. Putting the testing in context will be useful and important, I think, as the story gets out. It may well be true that the Navajo Nation does have more cases than, say, the rest of Arizona, and that would be consistent with the way that the disease has fallen unequally on different populations, right? Inequality is a pre-existing condition. Certainly would be true in Indian country, but it could also be true that because the nation exercised its sovereignty early to get going on this, they just know more than other rural and low-income populations throughout the West. Definitely are stories that show that the numbers of cases within the Navajo portion of Arizona are higher than in the rest of Arizona. But there, I think it's just a wait and see. It could just be because Navajo Nation was ahead of the game on testing. I think we just don't know yet.
It still fascinates me, though, that we can't get testing, but then Native Americans who have so little to work with were able to do that and have the foresight to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like as I've been following this story, I feel like it's telling us two things. One is absolutely revealing the underlying structural inequalities that Native people face in terms of their health, that they're more vulnerable, that because of leave and come home to shop and do wage work situation, they are more vulnerable to getting the disease. And then it's likely once they get sick due to pre-existing conditions because of inequality that they'll get sicker than, with wealthier populations. That's all true. At the same time, it's like a forceful show of tribal self-determination that the Navajo Nation was able to really step out ahead of the game and do more testing to find out the extent of the problem.
Sarah Krakoff, professor of natural resources and civil procedure Indian law. A new report warns that more than 250 million people around the world could face acute hunger because of the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Lisa Schlein reports for VOA from Geneva on the 2020 Global Report on Food Crises produced by the World Food Program, Food and Agriculture Organization, and 14 other agencies.
Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the report said 135 million people around the world were suffering from severe hunger. But authors of the report warn the pandemic will more than double that number by the end of the year if swift, vigorous action is not taken. The report cites the main drivers of world hunger as conflict, climate change, and economic crises. It says Africa is the worst affected continent in the world, followed by Asia and Latin America. It adds the majority of people suffering acute food insecurity, some 77%, are in countries of conflict. World Food Program Chief Economist Arif Hussein tells VOA people in countries such as Yemen, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Afghanistan, Syria, and South Sudan run the greatest risks.
If we don't get to them, their lives already hang by a thread. So if we don't get to them, they will pay the ultimate price. And every given day in normal times, there are about 21,000 people who lose their lives to hunger. Every given day, not COVID, every given day. A child dies every 10 seconds because of malnutrition.
Hussein says quick action must be taken to assist people in those and other countries at risk. He says trade and supply chains must act, and food and other necessary supplies must be pre-positioned. He says aid agencies can and must help governments that have safety nets and protection plans scale up those programs.
We should not forget about the agricultural sector. Imagine, okay, fine, we have good stocks right now, but if the supply chain stops to work and seeds and fertilizer and other things are not getting to farmers, or farmers cannot go to the field, what will happen next year? Next year, we will actually have a shortage of food. And that is something we must avoid.
UN aid agencies anticipate they will need between $10 and $12 billion this year to tackle the expected food crisis. But they say they need $1.9 billion immediately to make sure enough food is in place to assist people over the next 3 months, especially those who are trapped in war zones. Lisa Schlein for VOA News, Geneva.
Here are some of the other stories we're following at VOA. The World Health Organization said Tuesday that all available evidence suggests that the novel coronavirus originated in animals in China late last year and was not manipulated or produced in a laboratory. U.S. President Donald Trump said last week that his government was trying to determine whether the virus emanated from a lab in the central Chinese city of Wuhan, where the coronavirus pandemic emerged in December. The U.S. Navy Tuesday said that 2 U.S. warships are operating in the South China Sea, with 3 regional security sources saying they were near an area of a standoff between China and Malaysia. A Chinese government research ship was spotted last week conducting a survey close to an exploration vessel operated by Malaysia's state oil company months after it undertook a similar patrol off Vietnam. And allies of both Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his bitter foe, opposition leader Juan Guaido, have secretly begun exploratory talks as concerns grow about the possible impact of the spread of the coronavirus. The discussions emerged from concerns about the respiratory illness, hyperinflation, and growing fuel shortages, as well as worries among some members of the ruling Socialist Party about how to ensure their political survival under a possible change of government as Washington tightens sanctions. Stay with VOA for all the latest world news.